Hi everyone, Tyler Rust here for our second session in United States History to 1877. I'm recording this without any participants because I had some technology issues when we did our live session yesterday, and I wasn't able to capture all the discussion, and I'm really sorry about that. But I still wanted to share with you the slides and my own take on some of the comments I made, so that you can at least be a part of what went on yesterday in a little bit. So I apologize. I'm working on the technology. This is a learning curve for me as well as for you, I'm sure. So bear with me. And today I'll be doing this solo recording, but next week I'll do a live recording so that you can hear and see more comments from others in our course. So today is session 2. We're talking about module number 2 from the course, which covers chapters 4, 5, and 6. And I have an objective for you here on the slide that I like to use for both the live sessions, but also if I were to be teaching this in a classroom setting. I would like to think that this is an objective that students would be able to achieve in one session. Having a good understanding of chapters 4 or 5 or 6. You can probably get this objective done by doing any one or all of those chapters. The objective for today's session is that we will express how the American colonies came to rebel against Great Britain and how they won their independence. So that's our objective for today. And at the end of this, it would be a good test or a good challenge to see if you could write out or express your own understanding of that objective. All right, so let's go into our agenda. The agenda that we covered in session number 2 began with a connector, and then we went through the chapters one at a time, talking a little bit about the reading guide, the text, the lectures, as well as the discussion questions. And for this video, I'm going to focus primarily on the discussion questions. So the connector for this is a great way to warm up a class, to start the discussion. And I thought of this because of the current unrest that is plaguing the country. And the connector here is, why do people rebel against their government? This, I think, would be a great way to access both connections to today as well as understanding from the material in chapter 4, 5, and 6. And some of the comments were about social, political, and economic reasons why people would rebel against their government, all of which are on display in the news media and on the streets of America right now. And we can find evidence of in the lead up to the fight against Great Britain in the Revolution, as well as the difficulties the nation faced in chapter 6, the New Nation. So the materials for this module are reading guides, texts, video lectures, and there is a feedback form, as well as a Facebook group for us to continue the discussion online. If you're not a Facebook person, I totally understand, and I'm going to be posting this video and others on the YouTube channel for History Dojo and Study Dojo. So in every session, I like to take time to talk a little bit more about ways to improve your understanding, your literacy, your study skills. And I do this because in my own teaching practice, I tend to try to build up these skills as the real meat and potatoes of what I'm teaching. I tell my students that they might not necessarily need the content that I'm giving them, but that they will need the skills that we are practicing around that content, the bankable skills of writing and reading and comprehension. And so for today, I'd like to focus on how to read and retain information in the course. Many of my students have expressed to me that they struggle to understand the important material from a text. And they often fall short on tests or essays because they tell me they don't get the important information. And when I dug a little bit deeper into this, they revealed to me that it was very much because they would look over the text. And when I began to understand what look over the text meant, it came to mean that they really weren't reading as much as they were skimming. And so I'd like you to practice reading in a new way. I'd like you to time yourself. Take your phone or any other timer and just set it for a minute, and then try and read as much as you can in 1 minute. This is going to build up a sort of a mental muscle that you can use to improve your reading speed and your reading comprehension. After you read as much as you can for a minute, initially you might find you don't remember very much. And that's okay. It'd be the same thing as if you tried to run a 100-yard dash after not being in shape. The first time you do it, it's going to be hard. But you're going to get better at it, and soon you're going to get faster and you're going to retain more. So time yourself when you read, and then to cement your understanding, to cement your retention, I want you to verbalize, say out loud as much as you can remember after reading intensely for 1 minute. This action of verbalization creates the memory in our brain that we can use to draw upon later on, and allows us to retain the information over time. Verbalization also requires that we process the information that we've read so that we're not just skimming and letting it dissipate. We're reading and we are processing and we are retaining the information. So read for a minute and then verbalize out loud what you remember. And then just to follow up, you might then use the note pages that I've supplied in the reading guides to record what you know, jotting down important terms, comments, questions, an analysis that you can make after reading for a minute at each time. Okay, so that's that. Let's move on now to Chapter 4. Chapter 4, we'll talk a little bit about some content here without going into another lecture. The video lectures are available to you, and you should make use of those. But I chose an image from Chapter 4 as one way to kind of dive a little bit deeper in our discussion for today. And I chose the Benjamin Franklin Join or Die image that he produced in his newspapers and pamphlets. This is a fantastic image, I think, that represents the content of Chapter 4, which really is about the growing conflict between the colonials and the king. And it reflects, I think, this image reflects, I think, a new emerging American identity that isn't born only out of the European tradition, but is actually a combination of Native American and American colonial experience. The snake cut into different pieces is not an image that Benjamin Franklin made himself, but one he adopted from the Iroquois Confederacy, which was a collection of Iroquois tribal groups in northern New York and New England that would come together for self-defense, and that in it they would live independent of one another, but in times of war or famine or any difficulty, they would come together for their own collective security. And that's what this image means for Ben Franklin, that the colonies, not the United States, the colonies needed to join or die, that they needed to come together in a system of collective security and benefit when they needed it, but maintained their independence when they were in peaceful times. And here you can see he's labeled the snake with different colonies from the colonial era. What's even more important about this is to note that this really is the beginning of our federal system, a system not adopted from Europe, but a system born out of Native American and colonial American experience. The Iroquois Confederacy gives us our federal system, where we have a federal government that defends us in times of trouble, and we have state systems that operate on a local level independent of one another. The American Revolution is Chapter 5, and in Chapter 5 I selected an image of the Boston Tea Party as one way for us to get into why the United States declared independence, as well as how did they win the war. I apologize for the typo on this slide. It should be how did they win the war, not how did the United States with the war. I apologize. The Boston Tea Party is another one of those events that we can probably draw upon from our current situation, our current troubles that we're looking at, because it's It's an anti-government protest that destroys private property in the name of freedom. And we can see a lot of similar calls in the streets of this country today. What's interesting about this is that many of the Sons of Liberty who participated in this dressed as Native Americans. And you can see that in the image here, that these people are cheering on the Native Americans who are throwing the tea into Boston Harbor. But these aren't Native Americans. These are Sons of Liberty. These are white American colonialists who are disguising themselves as Native Americans. Now, why do they do that? And the answer is that they are showing that this is not, they're attempting to show that this is not just a Bostonian rebellion, that this isn't just a colonial rebellion, that this is an American rebellion, that this is something that includes Native Americans as well. And they're trying to broaden the appeal and the identity of this movement to attract more support for what they're doing. They're not thinking small. They are thinking big here, that this is the beginning of something very big. Chapter 6. For Chapter 6, the discussion was about how radical the American Revolution was and was the United States a Christian nation. And I've created a video on those discussion topics for you. So if you're wondering why I'm not going into the discussion topics in this video, it's because there's another lecture available if you're interested in each one of those chapter discussions. But for our session, I selected these 3 images to share as ways for us to talk a little bit about the new nation. After the revolution, the real challenge, the real work begins, where the struggle of governance begins. And one of the most important members of that early republic is Alexander Hamilton, who solves a lot of the instability of the situation after the war with his economic plans. As the first Treasury Secretary, he comes up with the Report on Manufactures is a way of organizing the American government and the American economy. And he also nationalizes the Revolutionary War debts. And this is designed in order to keep the country from breaking up after the difficulty of the revolution and the costs that were not shared evenly by all of the colonies. Massachusetts spent an enormous amount of money on the war, whereas South Carolina, not so much. The other part of this, of course, is Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson's, presidency is significant. He's a giant of this time period, but his presidency is significant because it's the first presidency, the first time in American history that we see a peaceful transfer of power from one political party to another. Because while Hamilton, Washington, and Adams were all Federalists, Thomas Jefferson was not. Thomas Jefferson and Madison, they represented the opposition party in early American government. They represented the Democratic Republican Party. And in 1800, John Adams loses to Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson takes over as the first peaceful transition of power, showing that the system worked, that we didn't have a president for life, we didn't have a civil war after a democratic election that transferred power away from the original holders to a new party. And that's a success story of how the system that they invented really worked. So that's that in a nutshell. There's more there, obviously, and on our Facebook page, as well as in our future sessions, we can dive deep into it, or even go back and talk about a lot of these topics. So summary reflections are here. You can read it for yourself. I won't beleaguer you with a lot of conversation now, but I do want to point out that there is a reflection survey that went out in the agenda that I shared with our course. And I'd really appreciate it if you would complete that. It gives me really valuable information on how to improve the course in ways that you would like to see. And obviously, questions you have, things you've learned, something you want to know more about, these can all be answered on our Facebook page, or you can email me directly and you all have that information. Our next session is on Monday, June 15th at 11:30 Pacific time. If you're not able to join us, that's totally fine. I will post another video like this for you to watch on YouTube and on our Facebook page. Okay, so thank you for joining me. I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet because I know I respect your time and I know you've got a lot of things going on too. And I certainly hope to see you on Monday at session number 3, which will cover module 3, chapters 7, 8, and 9. Okay, thank you very much.